A distant red dwarf star burned dimly in the background, its dying light barely illuminating the barren surface of an unnamed planet. A harsh wind carried dust across endless rocky terrain, whispering through the emptiness as if mourning something long forgotten. Then, out of the silence, came a metallic groan. A damaged escape pod lay half buried in the sand, its once polished silver hull now scorched and cracked. Faint blue energy flickered along its edges, the last remnants of its failing power core. Inside, a frail figure stirred. She was small, delicate, and utterly alone. Her dark purple skin bore intricate silver markings, glowing softly like forgotten constellations. Her blind eyes, milky white with no pupils, stared into nothingness, yet she saw everything in ways no one else could. Her fingers trembled as they moved over the cracked interior of the pod, her breathing shallow and unsteady. A weak, broken sound escaped her lips. A word in an alien language, so soft it almost dissolved into the wind. Then, she spoke again, this time, in something more familiar. "Is anyone there?" A desperate distress signal pulsed from the dying pod, sending out a whisper through the void of space. But she knew the truth. No one would come. No one ever did. In deep space, Commander Darren Cole was tired of ghosts. For 4 years, he had wandered the edges of colonized space, working salvage, scouting for habitable planets, and trying, failing, to escape the memories of war. He had seen too many wrecks, too many desperate messages left behind by people who never made it out alive. So when his ship's AI, Echo, suddenly chirped with an unknown distress beacon, he almost ignored it. "Commander," Echo's synthetic voice hummed through the cockpit. "Signal detected. Origin, unregistered escape vessel. Weak life signs detected. Shall I?" "Ignore it," Darren muttered, adjusting his course. "Probably another old wreck." Silence. Then. "Survivor detected." Darren froze. His gut twisted. He had learned the hard way that survivors weren't always lucky. Sometimes, they were the unlucky ones. Still, something in the signal pulled at him. "Send me visuals," he sighed, rubbing his temples. The holoscreen flickered, showing the damaged escape pod, half buried in an alien desert. The life sign was weak, but it was there. And then, a voice came through. A faint, trembling voice. "Is anyone there?" Darren stopped breathing. There was something about that voice, something fragile, yet unbroken. A sound of someone who had already accepted death, yet still reached out one last time. He cursed under his breath. "Echo, prep landing." And with that, he dove toward the planet. The crash site. The moment Darren stepped off his ship, heat slammed into him. The air was thin, dry, and laced with a metallic tang. The dust storms had mostly settled, leaving the planet in a state of eerie stillness. No movement. No life. Just the hum of his ship's engines and the quiet beeping of his scanner. The escape pod was in worse shape up close. Scorch marks covered its hull, deep dents running along its sides. The hatch had been forced halfway open, but whatever was inside hadn't been able to crawl out. Darren's hand hovered over his pistol as he stepped forward. Then, he saw her. A small, alien girl, curled into herself, barely breathing. Her skin was bruised, her fragile arms covered in strange, shimmering scars. The silver markings across her body flickered weakly, as if the life was draining out of them. And her eyes. Blind, unfocused, but somehow, they turned toward him. Darren felt his heart skip. "You're human," she whispered. He had seen a lot in his years. But nothing like this. "Yeah," he said cautiously, kneeling beside her. "You're safe now." Her breath shuddered. "No. I am not." A sudden, violent tremor ran through her body. Darren instinctively reached out, gripping her shoulders to steady her. The moment his fingers touched her skin, his mind exploded. The vision. It lasted only a second, but it felt like a lifetime. A burning city, silver spires collapsing under fire. A woman screaming, reaching out with the same blind eyes. A council of shadowed figures, their voices cold as they declared, "She is a disgrace. A curse upon our bloodline. Let the stars take her." And then, a great, golden door, standing alone in the middle of the void. And behind it, something watching. Something that should not exist. Darren gasped as he was yanked back into reality. His pulse pounded against his skull, his breath sharp and uneven. What the hell was that? The girl was still trembling, her body radiating cold despite the heat around them. "You saw it?" Her voice was barely a whisper. Darren swallowed hard. He had been in war. He had seen horrors. But nothing had ever felt like that. And the worst part? It wasn't just a vision. It was real. Danger approaches. A distant rumble cut through the silence. Darren's instincts kicked in as he turned his gaze skyward. Above them, a ship was descending. Not his. Not friendly. The alien girl's breath hitched. Her body tensed. "They found me," she whispered. Darren's jaw tightened. He didn't know who they were, but he knew one thing for sure. "Not today, princess." He scooped her into his arms, turned toward his ship. And ran. A gunshot in the dark. A sharp whine filled the air. Darren barely had time to react before a shot rang out, and something slammed into his shoulder. Pain erupted, hot and searing. His vision blurred. His grip on the girl weakened. Footsteps approached. A voice, cold and emotionless, drifted through the air. "She does not belong here." Darren gritted his teeth, fighting against the pain. His free hand reached for his pistol. If they wanted a fight. They had no idea what kind of human they were dealing with. The searing pain in Darren's shoulder burned through his body like molten iron, but he refused to go down. His legs pushed forward as he clutched the fragile alien girl tighter against his chest. She was barely conscious, her breathing shallow, but her small hands trembled against his uniform. She knew what was happening. They were being hunted. Behind him, heavy boots slammed into the ground, kicking up sand as figures in dark armor advanced. Their weapons glowed with an eerie blue light, humming with deadly energy. "The human is resisting. Kill him." Darren didn't hesitate. He spun around, his pistol snapping up just as the first shot was fired. A bolt of plasma sliced through the air, barely missing his head. Darren dropped low, squeezing the trigger. Bang! A direct shot to the closest pursuer's helmet. The armored figure jerked backward, a burst of blue sparks erupting from their visor. Darren didn't wait to see if they were dead, he turned and ran, lungs burning as he sprinted toward his ship. The girl weakly clutched his jacket. Her voice, small and pained, rose over the chaos. "You don't understand. They won't stop." Darren gritted his teeth. "Yeah. Neither do I." His ship was only 50 meters away now. But then, a new voice rang out. "Enough." The air crackled with unnatural energy, and suddenly, everything froze. Not in the way one would expect. Time itself didn't stop, but movement did. Darren felt his own limbs lock in place, his muscles turning rigid as if gravity itself had betrayed him. The alien girl in his arms went completely still, her fragile body trembling in fear. Footsteps echoed. A figure emerged from the shadows, stepping forward with perfect, calculated grace. Their armor was different from the others, sleek, elegant, laced with golden filigree that pulsed with strange energy. The helmet retracted, revealing a face too perfect, too sharp to be human. A Keervalian. Darren had never met one before, but he had heard the stories. A species known for their psychic abilities, a race that ruled through control, not war. The Keervalian's violet eyes locked onto the girl. "Princess Valeth," the alien murmured. "Your exile ends today." The girl flinched at the name. Her fingers dug into Darren's jacket, barely able to lift her head. "No," she whispered, barely audible. "I won't go back." The Keervalian gave a small, unreadable smile. "You don't have a choice." Their gaze shifted to Darren, eyes gleaming with amusement. "And you, human. You have made a grave mistake." A pulse of energy rippled through the air, sending a painful jolt down Darren's spine. His entire body locked in place, muscles tensed like steel cords. His fingers twitched, fighting against the paralysis. The Keervalian took a slow, measured step forward. "You are irrelevant," they said smoothly. "Release the princess, and your death will be quick." Darren's jaw clenched. "Not happening." The Keervalian's eyes darkened. Amusement faded into something colder. Curious. A sudden, invisible force slammed into Darren's chest, knocking the wind out of him. The girl was ripped from his arms, floating weightlessly in the air. Her body was limp, her strength long gone. Darren roared in frustration, forcing his body to move. Pain exploded in his shoulder, but he didn't care. He had one shot at this. His free hand dropped to his belt, fingers curling around the plasma grenade clipped to his side. Click. The Keervalian's eyes widened. Darren's smirk was razor-sharp. "You wanna bet I'm irrelevant?" And then, he threw it. A flash of blinding light. The shockwave tore through the air, sending both the Keervalian and their soldiers stumbling back. The energy hold on Darren broke instantly, and he surged forward, grabbing the girl mid-air as she tumbled down. No time to waste. He ran. The ship's ramp slammed open the moment he reached it, Echo's voice blaring through the speakers. "Commander, incoming fire." Darren barely made it inside before the first energy blast struck. The hull rattled violently, alarms wailing as he collapsed onto the floor, the girl still in his arms. She shivered violently, her skin deathly cold. Her blind eyes fluttered open, barely. "You should have left me," she whispered weakly. Darren let out a breathless laugh, shaking his head. "Not my style, princess." The ship lurched upward, engines roaring to life. Through the cockpit window, Darren saw the Keervalian soldier rising from the dust, their face twisted in pure fury. Their lips moved. He couldn't hear the words, but he didn't have to. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. "Echo, get us the hell out of here." The stars blurred, and the ship jumped into hyperspace, leaving the burning planet, and the ghosts of the past, behind. Aboard the ship, the unlikely alliance. For a long time, there was silence. Darren sat in the cockpit, catching his breath, his injured shoulder throbbing with every pulse of his heartbeat. He had survived worse. But still, this was insane. A blind alien princess? A psychic assassin chasing them? He had just made an enemy of one of the most powerful species in the galaxy. Fantastic. A small, weak voice broke the silence. "Why?" Darren turned, looking at the girl. She sat against the wall, her knees drawn up to her chest. The flickering silver markings on her skin had dimmed even further, her strength nearly gone. But her expression, her blind, unfocused gaze, held something sharp beneath the exhaustion. "Why did you save me?" she whispered. "You don't even know who I am." Darren exhaled, rubbing the back of his neck. "Yeah, well. You needed saving." The girl's fingers curled into the fabric of her tattered clothing. Her voice grew quieter. No one ever saves me. Darren looked at her for a long moment. He didn't know her full story. Didn't know why she had been exiled. Didn't know why her own kind hunted her. But he did know one thing. She wasn't his enemy. And as far as he was concerned, she wasn't alone anymore. Well, he said, leaning back with a smirk. Guess there's a first time for everything. The girl's lips parted slightly, as if no one had ever said that to her before. And for the first time since her exile began. She wasn't just a lost, abandoned princess. She was Valeth. And she had a human ally. The transmission. Deep in the cold vastness of space, a message pulsed through the void. A transmission, sent from the Kirvalian warship. Target has escaped. Princess Valeth is with a human. Pursuing immediately. A pause. Then, a new voice crackled through the comms. Dark. Cold. Unforgiving. Bring her back alive. A heartbeat later. Kill the human. The ship hummed softly as it glided through hyperspace, stars stretching into endless white streaks beyond the cockpit window. Darren leaned back in his chair, exhaustion weighing down on him. His shoulder throbbed, his head ached, and yet, his mind refused to rest. His eyes flicked to the alien girl resting on the small cot near the control panel. Princess Valeth. He still couldn't wrap his head around it. A blind alien princess. On the run. Hunted by her own people. And now, she was his problem. His fingers drummed against the console. Taking her had been a gut decision, one made in the heat of battle. But now? He was questioning whether he had just signed his own death warrant. A groggy voice pulled him from his thoughts. You're thinking too loud. Darren turned. Valeth shifted slightly, her silver-etched skin glowing faintly in the dim light. Her blind eyes remained closed, but there was something eerily aware about her posture, as if she could feel his gaze. He scoffed. Didn't know telepathy was part of your trick set, princess. A small, tired smirk tugged at the corner of her lips. It's not. I just know the sound of doubt when I hear it. Darren exhaled through his nose, shaking his head. Yeah? Well, excuse me for wondering if I just pissed off the most powerful species in the galaxy for no reason. Valetha's smile faded. Her fingers curled into the fabric of the blanket wrapped around her. You didn't. The ship hummed softly as it glided through hyperspace, stars stretching into endless white streaks beyond the cockpit window. Darren leaned back in his chair, exhaustion weighing down on him. His shoulder throbbed, his head ached, and yet, his mind refused to rest. His eyes flicked to the alien girl resting on the small cot near the control panel. Princess Valeth. He still couldn't wrap his head around it. A blind alien princess. On the run. Hunted by her own people. And now, she was his problem. His fingers drummed against the console. Taking her had been a gut decision, one made in the heat of battle. But now? He was questioning whether he had just signed his own death warrant. A groggy voice pulled him from his thoughts. You're thinking too loud. Darren turned. Valeth shifted slightly, her silver-etched skin glowing faintly in the dim light. Her blind eyes remained closed, but there was something eerily aware about her posture, as if she could feel his gaze. He scoffed. Didn't know telepathy was part of your trick set, princess. A small, tired smirk tugged at the corner of her lips. It's not. I just know the sound of doubt when I hear it. Darren exhaled through his nose, shaking his head. Yeah? Well, excuse me for wondering if I just pissed off the most powerful species in the galaxy for no reason. Valetha's smile faded. Her fingers curled into the fabric of the blanket wrapped around her. You didn't. Silence stretched between them. Darren studied her for a moment, waiting, but she didn't elaborate. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. Look, I don't know what you did to get exiled, and honestly, I don't care. But I do need to know one thing. He leaned forward, voice dropping into something lower. Are they going to stop coming after you? A beat. Then. No. Her voice was quiet, but the weight behind it was enough to make Darren's stomach turn. He dragged a hand down his face. Fantastic. Before he could say another word, the ship shuddered violently. Alarms blared, red lights flashing across the control panel. Darren snapped upright, his instincts screaming. What the hell? Echo's voice crackled through the speakers. Commander, multiple ships approaching. They found us. Ambush in the void. Darren slammed his hands onto the controls, gripping the throttle as he yanked the ship out of hyperspace. The moment they dropped, the threat became clear. Four sleek, black warships hovered ahead, their deadly silhouettes cutting through the darkness of space. Kearvalian warships. Their plasma cannons glowed an ominous blue, already charging. Darren's gut twisted. Damn it, hang on. The ship jerked to the side as the first blast screamed past, barely missing them. Darren gritted his teeth, fingers flying over the controls. Echo, I need countermeasures, now. The AI's response was instant. Deploying. A stream of decoy flares burst from the ship, exploding in a blinding display of light. The Kearvalian cannons fired again, their shots scattering as they struggled to track their target. Darren seized the opening. He barreled the ship downward, weaving between the enemy vessels in a series of sharp, stomach-turning maneuvers. His fingers danced over the control panel, diverting power to shields. Can we jump again? Vailitha's voice cut through the chaos. Darren's jaw clenched. Not yet, NAV systems are still recalibrating. A blast slammed into the rear shields, sending sparks showering across the cockpit. Echo's voice rang out. Hull integrity at 67%. Not good. Darren's grip tightened around the controls. He needed an escape plan, fast. Echo, locate the nearest asteroid field. The AI processed for a millisecond before responding. A dense cluster is located 12,000 kilometers eastward. Warning, highly unstable. Plot a course. The ship lurched forward, engines roaring as Darren pushed them toward the asteroid field. Behind them, the Kearvalian ships pursued relentlessly, their firepower growing more aggressive. Another blast rocked the ship. Vailith gritted her teeth, gripping the sides of her seat. If we die for me, I will haunt you. Darren barked out a laugh despite the chaos. Good to know. The asteroid field loomed ahead, a swirling mass of jagged rocks spinning wildly through the void. Darren didn't slow down. Instead, he dove straight into it. The deadliest game of cat and mouse. The moment they entered the field, chaos erupted. Giant asteroids spun unpredictably, colliding into each other, sending deadly debris flying in every direction. Darren's ship twisted and turned, narrowly dodging each one. The Kearvalian ships followed, but they weren't as lucky. The first enemy vessel clipped an asteroid, its wing shattering on impact. It spiraled out of control, slamming into a larger rock with an explosive crash. Darren grinned. One down. Another Kearvalian ship fired wildly, trying to force them out of the field. Big mistake. Its laser blast struck an unstable asteroid, causing a chain reaction of explosions that swallowed the ship whole. Two down, Darren muttered. Only 2 enemy ships remained. They were smarter, moving carefully, waiting for the perfect shot. Darren's heart pounded as he jerked the controls, weaving between the rocks. But he was running out of options. And then, Vailith spoke. Head for the largest asteroid. Darren frowned. You want me to crash into it? Vailitha's glowing markings flickered faintly. Trust me. He hesitated. Then, he followed her lead. The massive asteroid loomed ahead, a dark, ominous mass twice the size of their ship. The Kirvalian warships closed in, sensing the kill. And then, Vailith raised her hand. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the asteroid trembled. A deafening crack echoed through space. The massive rock split apart, sending jagged chunks hurtling in every direction. The enemy ships had no time to react. He had made enemies before. But this? This was on an entirely different level. His fingers tapped against the control panel. We need a place to lay low. Echo's voice crackled through the speakers. Analyzing potential safe zones. Nearest uncharted outpost is Fenrir 9, a rogue station outside known Republic territories. Darren frowned. Fenrir 9? Thought that place was abandoned. Echo responded, scans indicate active life signatures. Minimal records available. Potential black market operations detected. Darren let out a low whistle. Perfect. Criminals don't ask questions. He glanced at Vailith. You good with that, princess? Her blind eyes flicked in his direction. I do not believe I have many options. That's the spirit. With a sharp flick of his wrist, Darren engaged the ship's thrusters, setting their course toward Fenrir 9. But as the ship jumped into hyperspace, he couldn't shake the feeling. They were still being watched. Fenrir 9, the den of ghosts. The moment they docked, Darren knew this place was trouble. Fenrir 9 was barely holding together. Rust-covered metal beams stretched overhead, struggling to support the weight of the ancient space station. Flickering neon lights buzzed from old, half-broken signs. A dense haze of smoke filled the air, carrying the scent of burning fuel, spilled alcohol, and desperation. It was the kind of place where rules didn't exist. Which made it the perfect hiding spot. Darren adjusted his jacket, his eyes scanning the dimly lit corridors. Stay close, princess. Don't talk to anyone, don't touch anything. Vailith arched an eyebrow. Do I look like a child to you? Darren snorted. No. But you do look like someone who'd get kidnapped in 5 seconds. Her expression remained blank. Let them try. Darren rolled his eyes. Great. I love the confidence. Let's go. They moved through the winding paths of the station, passing by mercenaries, traders, and shady dealers. Every step felt like walking through a minefield, eyes lingering on them longer than Darren liked. And then, they reached their destination. A dingy, half-lit bar tucked into the back of the station. The kind of place where information was currency. Darren led the way inside, guiding Vailith toward a booth in the corner. Wait here. Don't start any wars while I'm gone. Vailith tilted her head. I make no promises. Darren sighed and made his way toward the bar. Behind the counter stood a broad-shouldered man with scarred skin and cybernetic eyes. He recognized Darren the moment he stepped forward. Well, well. If it ain't the dead man walking. Darren smirked. Miss me, Kellen? The bartender chuckled. Depends. You bring trouble? Darren glanced over his shoulder at Vailith. Yeah. Big trouble. Kellen's grin faded. Then you better tell me why I shouldn't throw you out right now. Darren exhaled. Because I need information. And I know you still owe me a favor. Kellen's cybernetic eyes flickered, scanning him up and down. Then, he nodded toward the back room. Talk fast. Darren followed him inside, his pulse steady but alert. He knew one wrong move could mean the end. And outside? Vailith sat in the dim light, her blind eyes seemingly unfocused, but she was listening. Her fingers traced the edge of the table, feeling the vibrations in the air. She could sense them. The hunters. They were already here. Waiting. Watching. And she knew. Their time was running out. Final scene, the shadow moves. Back on the Keir-Volyan flagship, General Vorik stood before a massive holographic display. A soldier knelt before him. "We have confirmation. The princess has been located on Fenrir 9. The general's violet eyes gleamed. "And the pilot?" "Still with her." A slow, calculated smile spread across Vorik's lips. "Then let us pay them a visit." Outside the massive warship, dozens of sleek black vessels activated their thrusters and set a course for Fenrir 9. The hunt was far from over. The ship hummed steadily as it drifted through the black abyss, the stars twinkling like distant memories, unreachable and cold. Darren sat in the pilot's seat, his hands gripping the controls tightly, eyes fixed on the endless void before him. But his mind wasn't on the stars. It was on the words he had heard from Kellen in the backroom. They weren't safe. Not here. Not anywhere. Fenrir 9 wasn't just a hiding place, it was a target. Kellen's warning echoed in his mind, each syllable like a chill in his spine. The Keir-Volyans are coming. Darren's fingers flexed around the controls, his mind racing. He had to think fast. Options were running thin. Behind him, Valeth sat motionless in her seat, her fingers barely grazing the edge of the console. She had said little since they'd entered the station's dark depths. Her silence was unsettling, more so than the ship's constant creaks or the oppressive stillness outside the hull. Her aura was different now. Darren couldn't quite place it, but he could feel it. Something was off. The silence between them stretched out until it became unbearable. Finally, Darren spoke. "We need to move." His voice was low, as if speaking too loud would make the tension even worse. Valeth didn't acknowledge him immediately, her head slightly tilted as though listening to something beyond the confines of the ship. Then, without turning to him, she spoke. "You know they're coming, don't you?" Darren's heart skipped a beat. His grip tightened on the controls. "Yeah." Kellen confirmed it. "And I'm guessing you knew that already." A cold chuckle escaped Valeth's lips. "I feel them. Their presence. They're closing in on us. The energy of the ship, it's vibrating differently. It's the hunters." Darren's mind flashed back to the moment when he first saw her display that strange, otherworldly ability. He had chalked it up to desperation, maybe even a stroke of luck. But now? Now it was starting to feel like there was something far deeper, something terrifyingly powerful, lurking just beneath her calm exterior. "How do we get out of here?" Darren asked, his voice strained. Valeth didn't answer immediately, her attention fixed on the glowing controls in front of her. After a moment, she spoke, her tone distant. "We cannot outrun them." Her voice was cold, almost sorrowful. "But we might be able to outsmart them." Darren's brows furrowed. "Outsmart them?" Valeth nodded slowly. "I can make the ship seem as though it's not here. A simple trick, one that'll make them look in the wrong direction." "Can you do that?" Darren asked, his voice tinged with disbelief. She didn't answer immediately, her fingers lightly brushing the console as her mind seemed to focus on something only she could sense. When she finally spoke, her words were calm and confident. "I can." Darren's heart skipped a beat. "All right, do it. Now." Valeth's fingers hovered above the controls, her eyes still closed, her body perfectly still. Darren watched, his breath caught in his throat, as the quiet hum of the ship shifted, like an ancient force was awakening inside the hull. And then, in an instant, the ship's signature, its energy, vanished. It was as though the ship had become invisible to anyone who might be looking. For a moment, there was only silence. "Is it done?" Darren asked, his voice tight with urgency. Valeth nodded. "They can't see us." "Not now." Darren let out a relieved breath, but his relief was short-lived. The fact remained, the Keervalians were still out there. And they were dangerous. Even if they couldn't see the ship, the threat they posed was far from over. Valeth turned to him, her blind eyes fixed on him as if she could sense the turmoil in his thoughts. "But this is temporary." Her voice was heavy with the weight of truth. "They will find us again, soon enough." Darren looked at her, his mouth dry. "How soon?" Her expression was unreadable, but her answer was as blunt as ever. "Very soon." His mind raced. He had to find a way to get them both out of this mess. But where could they go? What options were left to them? And then, like a bolt of lightning, a thought flashed into his mind: the starship. The Cerulean Star. Darren had only heard rumors about it, the mysterious warship, abandoned for years, drifting through the void, its fate unknown. Some said it was a derelict wreck, others whispered it was a hidden treasure trove, a ship of unimaginable technology, lost to time. It was a gamble, but Darren wasn't exactly in a position to play it safe. He looked at Valeth. "There's one place we might have a chance. The Cerulean Star." Valeth blinked, her head tilting slightly, the faintest hint of curiosity flashing in her blind eyes. "The Cerulean Star?" Darren nodded, his voice quiet but resolute. "It's said to be a derelict warship, hidden somewhere in the outer systems. We could hide there. It might be the only place where the Keervalians wouldn't be able to find us." Valeth's lips curled into a faint smile. "A dangerous gamble, but perhaps, just the thing we need." Darren set his jaw, determination flooding through him. They didn't have time to waste. "We're going to need a map of the outer systems, something that can guide us there." Valeth looked at him, her blind eyes glowing faintly in the dim light of the ship. "I will get it for you." She closed her eyes, and Darren watched as her body seemed to stiffen for a moment, as though she was pulling something deep from within herself. Then, her fingers moved swiftly over the controls, a sequence of unfamiliar symbols flashing across the screen. "I have it," she said softly. Darren didn't ask how she had done it. He didn't want to know. All he cared about was that she had. "Good. Let's go." He set the ship's course, and as they jumped into hyperspace, he couldn't help but feel the weight of the journey ahead. The unknown. The danger. And above all, the certainty that they were running out of time. The journey to the Cerulean Star was long and quiet. The ship sliced through the endless sea of stars, each mile taking them further from the life they had known, and deeper into the heart of a mystery that neither of them fully understood. As the days passed, Darren spent more and more time alone in the cockpit, contemplating their situation. Valeth had grown quieter as well, her presence becoming more intangible, like she was fading into the background, lost in thoughts that he could never touch. But there was a tension between them now, a kind of unspoken understanding. They were alone in this vast universe. No one was coming to save them. No allies. No hope. Just the two of them. And the hunters. As the ship drew closer to their destination, Darren felt the air in the cockpit grow heavy. Something was coming. Something terrifying. He wasn't sure what it was. But he knew it would change everything. The stars outside flickered like dying embers, their light barely reaching the ship as it sped through the unknown. Darren's eyes were fixed on the blackness beyond, his mind whirling with thoughts he couldn't quite grasp. They were so close now, close to the Cerulean Star. Close to the answers. Close to the truth. But there was something else. A feeling, a whisper in the back of his mind, telling him that their journey, this entire mission, was about to change. He felt it deep in his bones. Danger. It wasn't the Kirvalians that worried him, not anymore. After all, their ship's technology had been out of reach for a while, hidden behind the shields Valeth had cast around them. No, what terrified him was the sense of something ancient, something unpredictable, waiting for them in the depths of space. Something tied to the cerulean star. It didn't make sense. No one had ever really found the ship. At least, not and lived to tell about it. Valeth was sitting in the back of the cockpit, silent as always. Her face, as serene as the night, was now more distant than before. He couldn't shake the feeling that she knew more than she was letting on, more about the ship, more about what lay ahead. But every time he asked, she remained tight-lipped, offering only cryptic words or silence. And that made Darren nervous. The cerulean star. The rumors surrounding it had plagued him for weeks, whispers of a ship so advanced, so powerful, that it was feared by every civilization it had come across. The stories said that it was once a vessel of war, equipped with superior weaponry, unmatched by anything in the known galaxy. But then something happened. It had vanished. Some believed it had been abandoned, left to drift into the void. Others thought it had been lost in some far-off corner of space, forgotten by everyone, including its creators. But Darren had never fully believed the rumors. There was too much mystery, too many inconsistencies in the stories. And now, as he sped toward it, he could feel the weight of all those stories pressing down on him. What if the ship wasn't empty? What if it was still alive, in a sense, its secrets locked away, waiting for the right people to discover them? What if those people were them? Valeth shifted in her seat, breaking Darren from his reverie. She had been unusually still for the past few days, her senses likely attuned to something he couldn't comprehend. The silence between them was no longer comfortable. It had become a barrier. "We're getting close," she said, her voice low and barely audible above the hum of the ship's engines. Darren nodded, not trusting himself to speak. His throat felt dry, his palms sweaty. He hadn't realized how close they were until she had spoken. The cerulean star was no longer just a distant rumor. It was right in front of them. And with it, the unknown. The ship's navigation system suddenly blinked to life. He stared at the screen in disbelief. "What the hell?" he muttered, his heart racing. The system was showing a massive energy spike, one that wasn't supposed to exist in the area they were in. It was unnatural, like something was pulling the ship off course. "Valeth!" Darren shouted, his voice rising in urgency. "What's happening?" But she wasn't in the cockpit. The seat beside him was empty. Panic surged through him, his pulse hammering in his ears. He spun around to find the back of the cockpit completely vacant. Where did she go? His breath hitched, and his heart pounded. Had she left? He glanced at the console again, his eyes narrowing. The energy spike wasn't random, it was targeted. Someone was pulling them in. And then he saw it. A massive shadow in the distance, forming from the edges of space like a dark cloud, its form barely perceptible at first. The starship, the cerulean star, was no longer a distant anomaly. It was there, looming, impossibly close. The pull of its gravity well had increased, locking them in its grasp, dragging them towards it with an undeniable force. The ship's systems screamed in protest as Darren slammed his hand on the controls, trying to break free, but it was no use. They were going in. In the midst of the chaos, a familiar voice filled the air. "I told you," Valeth's voice echoed through the speakers. "They were always waiting for us." Darren's eyes widened, the realization dawning on him like a cold wave. Valeth had known. She had known all along. He slammed his fist against the console in frustration. "Why didn't you tell me?" But her voice was calm, as though she had expected this moment. "I couldn't. You needed to see it for yourself." The truth was never meant to be told. Darren clenched his teeth, fighting the overwhelming urge to scream. His hands gripped the controls once more, but nothing he did could stop the inevitable. The ship was falling straight into the gravitational pull of the cerulean star. He could see it now, fully formed, in all its majesty and terror. It was a vessel unlike anything he had ever seen, sleek, yet terrifying. A warship, yes, but its appearance was unlike anything human design could conceive. Its hull was made of dark, shimmering materials, glowing faintly with an eerie energy that hummed through the vacuum of space. And there, floating just outside the ship, was something else, something Darren had only seen in the deepest of his dreams. A figure. A shadow. A presence. Darren's mind reeled. He had no idea what he was seeing. No idea what was really out there. The ship was closing in on them. They were now locked in its orbit, pulled by the overwhelming force of its gravity. But there was still time, a chance to escape. He could still fight back. But there was one thing he couldn't escape, the truth. The truth that Valeth had known everything. The truth that the cerulean star wasn't just a ship. It was something more. Something alive. Something ancient. And he had just entered its grasp.